Most people think their deepest wound comes from what others did to them. The parent who didn't protect them, the partner who walked away, the boss who crushed their spirit. But the harshest wound is not what others do. It's what you quietly do to yourself every single day. Self-betrayal. It looks small, almost invisible. Saying yes when every part of you screams no. Smiling when you want to speak up. Agreeing to stay when your soul is begging you to leave. And in the moment, it feels safer. You avoid conflict, avoid rejection, avoid being seen as selfish or difficult. But here's the brutal truth. Every time you betray yourself, you break your own heart first. And instead of admitting that, most of us point the finger outward. We blame our parents, our partners, our culture, our society. But the truth is sharper. You were the first to walk away from yourself. This is the betrayal nobody wants to name. Not because it isn't real, but because it's unbearable to face. The tragedy of self-betrayal is that it rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive with thunder shouting, "This is the moment you gave up on yourself." Instead, it slips in quietly, through the smallest decisions. The ones you tell yourself don't matter. You laugh at a joke that cuts too close, even though it stings. You pretend to care when inside you're numb. You stay quiet in moments that beg for honesty, because speaking would risk too much. Each of these moments feels minor, forgettable, but over time, they form a pattern of walking away from your own truth. And the person you abandon most consistently isn't your partner, your friends, or your family. It's yourself. Carl Jung understood this with piercing clarity. He saw that every person carries a tension between the persona, the mask we wear to gain acceptance, and the shadow, the hidden parts of ourselves we exile because we fear they'll cost us love. At first, the mask feels protective. It helps you fit in, survive, be liked. But if you wear it too long, it stops being a mask. It becomes your face. And when that happens, you're no longer living as yourself. You're living as a version of yourself designed to please others. This is the first betrayal. Not dramatic, not catastrophic, but devastating in its subtlety. Kierkegaard, the philosopher of despair, went even further. He argued that the deepest despair is not when the world hurts you, but when you refuse to be yourself. Not wanting to be oneself, he wrote, is the most profound form of despair, because it means you've cut yourself off from your own life source. And modern psychology confirms this. In the 1990s, researchers Dana Jack and Dana Dill studied what they called self-silencing. They found that people, especially in close relationships, often suppress their needs, their anger, even their joy, in order to avoid conflict or rejection. But the cost wasn't peace. It was depression, anxiety, and a hollow sense of self. One participant described it like this: "I feel like a ghost in my own life, present, but not alive." That is what happens when you abandon yourself. You still go through the motions, working, smiling, saying the right things, but inside, something begins to vanish. And the worst part? Most of the time you don't even notice it happening, because the world applauds it. The agreeable coworker is praised for being a team player. The partner who sacrifices their needs is admired for being selfless. The child who never speaks up is called easy. But beneath those compliments, a fracture deepens. Each time you say yes when you mean no, a crack forms. Each time you stay silent when your truth is begging to be spoken, another piece of you goes missing. Until one day, you look in the mirror and realize you've built a life where you no longer recognize yourself. And that's the brutal irony. Self-betrayal feels like the path to safety, to love, to belonging. But in reality, it's the slow erosion of everything that makes you whole. And this is the cruel paradox. The very act that erodes your wholeness feels, in the moment, like protection. Why do we do it? Why do we keep betraying ourselves when deep down we know the cost? Because betrayal wears the mask of safety. When you volunteer when you're already drowning, you avoid being called selfish. When you soften your words until they no longer sound like you avoid disapproval. When you cling to a routine that no longer fits, you avoid the terror of being left behind. For a brief moment, it works. The storm is postponed. The room stays calm. You are tolerated, even praised. But beneath that surface calm, something darker is happening. You are teaching yourself that peace comes at the price of your own voice. Philosophers saw this long before psychology gave it language. Friedrich Nietzsche described a condition he called ressentiment, a subtle form of self-poisoning. Instead of confronting the truth of our choices, we redirect the weight outward. We tell ourselves stories. I had no choice. They made me do it. If they were different, I'd be free. This is the seed of blame. But beneath it lies fear. Because to admit the truth, that you betrayed yourself first, is unbearable. And Erich Fromm, in Escape from Freedom, warned of the same instinct. He saw that people often prefer the cage of dependence to the uncertainty of freedom. Why? Because freedom requires you to own your choices, to stand in the storm of rejection and still say, "This is who I am." That, for many, feels far more terrifying than the quiet death of self-betrayal. So we settle. We stay in jobs that crush our spirit because at least the paycheck is steady. We stay in relationships that strip us bare because at least we're not alone. We silence opinions in friend groups because at least we won't be judged. In each of these moments, betrayal feels like the safer path. But what is really happening is erosion, a slow dissolving of the self. Modern psychology names this trade-off clearly. Studies on uncertainty and tolerance show that human beings will often choose a predictable pain over an unpredictable freedom. One experiment even showed participants willing to endure a known electric shock rather than wait for a possible but uncertain one. The brain's wiring says, certainty equals safety, even when the certainty is suffering. And this is the hidden engine of self-betrayal. We don't betray ourselves because we enjoy it. We betray ourselves because the brain whispers, if you bend here, if you silence yourself, if you disappear just a little, maybe you'll be safe. But that safety is a lie. It's the comfort of a cage, the stillness of a prison. It numbs you today, but it robs you tomorrow. Because the longer you lean on betrayal as protection, the less capable you become of standing in your own truth. And one day, the price comes due, not in the form of conflict avoided, but in the form of a life unlived. And when that day comes, when you finally feel the hollowness of a life unlived, most of us still don't look inward, we look outward, because it is easier to point the finger than to face the mirror. This is where the blame game begins. Blame feels cleaner than self-confrontation. If you can pin your emptiness on someone else, the parent who failed you, the culture that pressured you, the boss who used you, then you don't have to face the deeper wound, the ways you quietly abandoned yourself along the way. Carl Jung warned of this dynamic in his work on projection. He argued that the traits we refuse to confront in ourselves are the very ones we attack in others. If you suppress your anger, you'll call others aggressive. If you hide your envy, you'll call others greedy. If you abandon your truth, you'll accuse others of silencing you. Projection becomes the shield of the self-betrayer, a way of dodging responsibility by outsourcing the discomfort to someone else. Psychology today explains this with the concept of cognitive dissonance. When our actions don't align with our values, the dissonance is unbearable. And instead of admitting, "I betrayed myself," the mind resolves the tension by rewriting the story. They forced me. They left me no choice. If they respected me, I wouldn't have done that. But the brutal truth remains. You were in the room when the betrayal happened. You signed off on it. Think about it. You agree to take on a project at work you didn't want, then months later collapse in resentment and blame the boss. But the deeper truth is, you never said no. You stay in a friendship that drains you, then resent the other person for being demanding. But the deeper truth is, you kept answering the phone. You tell yourself a partner makes you feel small, when the truth is, you've been shrinking yourself all along. Blame becomes a cycle that feels protective, but in reality, it's corrosive. Because the more you blame, the less you grow. You outsource your agency. You frame yourself as the victim of other people's choices, when the sharpest pain always began with your own choice to abandon yourself. As Nietzsche already warned with his idea of ressentiment, this outward blame becomes poison to the soul. It keeps you small, reactive, bitter. Instead of becoming who you are, You spend your energy indicting everyone else for the prison you quietly walked into. And here's the paradox. The moment you blame, you feel a rush of relief. It's not my fault, it's them. But that relief is short-lived, because the real wound remains unhealed. The confrontation still waits, in the reflection you've been avoiding. Modern studies echo this too. Research on external locus of control shows that people who consistently attribute their struggles to outside forces suffer more anxiety, more depression, and less resilience. Why? Because they've handed over the steering wheel of their lives. Blame might soothe the ego, but it starves the soul. And the tragedy is this: the more you point outward, the less you notice how fractured you've become within. The anger you hurl at others is often the anger meant for yourself. For all the times you said yes when you meant no. For all the times you stayed silent when you wanted to speak. For all the times you traded truth for safety. This is the second betrayal. Not only do you abandon yourself, but then you hide that betrayal beneath layers of blame. And the longer you live in that cycle, the more fragmented you become. And that fragmentation has a cost. It shows up not just in your relationships, but in the hollow way you look at your own reflection. And soon, it seeps even deeper, into your body, your mind, and your spirit. The first sign is fragmentation. When you betray yourself enough times, your life begins to split into parts that no longer recognize one another. Outwardly, you play the role: competent, agreeable, dependable. Inwardly, you feel hollow, like a stranger watching your own life unfold. It's what Jung described as neurosis, the suffering that arises when different parts of the psyche pull in opposite directions. The mask you wear tells one story, but the shadow beneath it whispers another. Over time, this tension doesn't just create discomfort, it creates collapse. Kierkegaard warned of this long before modern psychology gave it language. He called it despair, the sickness unto death, the condition of living in contradiction with yourself. For him, external suffering was never the deepest wound. The true wound was to live at odds with your own essence, to wake up each day and realize you are estranged from your own being. And the tragedy is that the world might never see the fracture. On the surface, you look strong, successful, even enviable, while inside, you're unraveling. Modern psychology has confirmed this with brutal clarity. Long-term self-silencing has been linked to depression, anxiety, even identity diffusion, the sense of not knowing who you are when the performance ends. People who chronically betray themselves report higher levels of exhaustion, emotional numbness, and what researchers call existential emptiness. They aren't simply tired from work or stressed by life. They feel drained because the very energy of the self has been siphoned away into keeping up appearances. And you've seen it in quiet ways. The colleague who never misses a deadline, yet confesses they feel like an imposter. The friend who smooths over every conflict but crumbles when the room is empty. The partner who laughs easily in public, but admits in private they no longer feel alive in their own home. These aren't just personal quirks. They're the visible scars of self-betrayal accumulated over years. The body, too, keeps score. Chronic muscle tension, restless sleep, immune weakness. These are often less about external pressure and more about the internal fracture of living in constant dissonance. Neuroscience shows that when you habitually silence yourself, your stress system never fully shuts down. Cortisol levels stay elevated. The nervous system learns vigilance as its default. What we call burnout is often the physical expression of an unresolved inner war. And here lies the cruel irony. Society rarely questions it. You'll be labeled reliable, admirable, resilient. Outwardly, you look composed. But inwardly, you are a mosaic of masks, each one further burying the self you were meant to live as. Every time you betray yourself, you widen the fracture of your own freedom. And the longer you let that fracture spread, the harder it becomes to piece yourself back together. But there is a way out, and it begins not with blame, not with denial, but with something far harder: radical responsibility. Radical responsibility begins at the place most of us fear to look: the mirror. It asks a question that cuts deeper than blame ever could. Where did I walk away from myself? Not, where did they fail me? Not, how did life cheat me? But how many times did I silence my own truth to preserve a fragile peace? How many times did I sign my name at the bottom of my own betrayal? This does not absolve others of what they did. It simply returns your agency to where your choices live. This is not about self-condemnation. Shame is just another mask, another way of avoiding responsibility by drowning in guilt. True responsibility, the radical kind, is different. It is clarity without cruelty. It is looking honestly at the fracture and saying, yes, I see it, and now I choose differently. Viktor Frankl, a man who endured the unspeakable horrors of the concentration camps, put it with brutal simplicity. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Even in conditions where almost everything was stripped away, Frankl insisted one freedom remained: the freedom to choose your stance. That is the heart of radical responsibility. To claim the space between what happens and how you respond, and to stop using betrayal as the bridge across it. Nietzsche echoed this in his call to become who you are. It sounds poetic, even simple, until you realize what it requires. Owning the fact that no one else can walk your path for you. Not parents, not partners, not leaders. To become yourself means to stop outsourcing your choices and to stop narrating your life as though someone else holds the pen. It is the opposite of the escape from freedom reflex we named earlier. And Jung, in his idea of individuation, insisted that healing comes when you gather back the parts of yourself you abandoned, the shadow, the silenced voice, the denied anger, even the forgotten joy. Radical responsibility is not just about avoiding betrayal moving forward. It is about returning to the scenes of your old betrayals and reclaiming what you left behind. Modern psychology affirms this too. Kristin Neff's work on self-compassion shows that the real shift doesn't come from berating yourself for past betrayals. It comes from meeting yourself with kindness while still naming the truth. Self-compassion is not indulgence. It is the courage to say, I abandoned myself before, but I refuse to do it again. That stance, paradoxically, strengthens resolve more than self-criticism ever could. The turning point happens in small, almost invisible choices. You notice yourself about to say yes out of habit, and this time, you pause. You feel the urge to justify your boundary, and this time, you let silence hold it. You catch the impulse to blame someone else, and this time, you ask, what part of me did I abandon here? Each of these moments is a reclamation, a piece of your life returning to you. Radical responsibility is not about perfection. You will still stumble. The old patterns will call you back. But now you know the truth. Every choice is a fork in the road. One path leads deeper into the grave of self-betrayal. The other leads toward wholeness. And with each step, no matter how small, you practice choosing yourself. And this is where the shift begins, when responsibility no longer feels like a burden, but like a doorway back into your own life. Step through that doorway, and everything begins to shift. Because once you've faced the cost of self-betrayal, once you've claimed the responsibility of choosing yourself, the question naturally follows, how do you live differently? How do you build a life where your choices no longer fracture you, but bring you back together? The answer is integrity. Not the kind stamped on slogans or preached in empty platitudes, but the lived reality of alignment. Integrity means your outer life and your inner truth finally begin to meet. No more saying yes while your body screams no. No more smiling to hide a storm. No more slicing yourself into fragments just to keep others comfortable. Living with integrity doesn't mean flawless consistency. It means wholeness. It means you stop amputating parts of yourself to fit in. As Jung showed in his vision of individuation, wholeness comes when you reclaim the shadow you once exiled. Not to indulge it, not to parade it, but to accept it as part of who you are. When the hidden and the visible reconcile, the tension softens. The mask no longer has to suffocate you. Erich Fromm described true freedom as the spontaneous activity of the total self. Freedom, in his sense, isn't rebellion or license. It's coherence. It's acting from your whole being, not from fear of rejection or hunger for approval. And coherence reveals itself in the smallest gestures, saying no without cushioning it with apologies, holding silence instead of scrambling to justify yourself, choosing to walk away from what drains you, even if no one else understands. These aren't grand revolutions, they're quiet corrections, but string them together and you weave a life of dignity. Psychologists today confirm this. Research on authenticity shows that people who act in alignment with their values, even at the cost of approval, report higher well-being, greater resilience, and deeper satisfaction. Not because life becomes easy, but because life finally feels like theirs. Think of the difference. A life built on self-betrayal feels like performance. Every decision filtered through the question, will they accept this? But a life built on integrity feels like presence. You speak because it is true, not because it is safe. You act because it aligns, not because it pleases. You stop living for an audience and start inhabiting your own skin. And here's the paradox. When you live with integrity, respect often follows. Not because you demand it, but because others sense the weight of someone who cannot be bought by approval or bent by fear. Kierkegaard warned that despair is refusing to be yourself. But once you embrace yourself fully, even in imperfection, despair begins to loosen its grip. The world may resist this wholeness. Some will call you difficult, selfish, arrogant, but those are only echoes of the old script, the one that depended on your compliance. Your task is not to appease those voices. Your task is to remain whole. Because wholeness is freedom, wholeness is strength, and wholeness is the beginning of a life where you no longer betray yourself just to belong. And this is where the circle closes. The title of this video was never an accusation. Why you betray yourself, then blame everyone else. It was a mirror. Look closely and the pattern is stark. Self-betrayal comes first, blame arrives after, and together they build the prison that keeps you small. But the key has always been in your hands. The moment you stop abandoning yourself, the need to cast villains dissolves. You no longer require a story to explain the emptiness, because you've reclaimed the power that emptiness was using against you. This does not erase what others did. It does not deny how culture wounds. It simply anchors the deepest shift where your agency lives. You refuse to wound yourself anymore. You stop agreeing against your better judgment. You stop burying truths that are begging to be spoken. You stop reshaping yourself into something survivable and allow yourself to become someone whole. Because in the end, safety, respect, and belonging don't come from betraying yourself. They come from choosing yourself, again and again. So here's the question I'll leave you with. Where in your life is the pull to betray yourself strongest? At work, in your family, or in your relationships? Write it down, say it out loud, name it. The moment you name it, you break the silence that betrayal depends on. And if this message resonated, subscribe to this channel. Not to perform, not to prove, but because this is a place where you don't have to betray yourself to belong. The truth is simple, not easy. The world begins to change the moment you stop abandoning yourself.